Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really great guest involved in creating a better tomorrow on some really unique fronts. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. David Tarantino, who is the Chief Medical Officer at the United States Customs and Border Protection Organization, the largest federal law enforcement agency of our U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which is the country's largest primary border control organization. Dr. Tarantino has previously served as an adjunct assistant professor at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, as Director for Civil Military Medical Affairs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs in the U.S. Department of Defense, as well as a family practice physician and flight surgeon of the U.S. Navy. Dr. Tarantino served also as a medical advisor to the Coalition Provisional Authority, the Ministry of Health, and then senior consultant for the U.S. mission to Baghdad, to the Interim Iraqi government Ministry of Health. And his military career has been distinguished over the years with multiple challenging overseas and operational assignments, including medical and humanitarian missions in Iraq, Alaska, Haiti, Guyana, Tanzania, Cambodia, Estonia, and several Pacific Rim nations. He served as the medical director and team physician for a challenging deployment to Turkey in the aftermath of their 1999 earthquake, providing emergent medical and surgical care in this unique and austere setting. Dr. Tarantino has his bachelor's degree in human biology from Stanford University, his medical degree from Georgetown University School of Medicine, did residency in family medicine at Bremerton Naval Hospital, a preventive medicine residency at USUHS, as well as having an international diploma in humanitarian assistance from the Institute of International Humanitarian Affairs. A lot of really interesting topics to get into today with him. We're honored to have him. Dr. David Tarantino, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
My pleasure. It's great to join you. I appreciate the outreach and the interest.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating set of topics we're going to be getting into that we don't normally hear about when we talk about the United States border. But to start off, I would love, David, just to hand you the floor for a little bit to talk a little bit more about you. If you could take us back, sort of the early days. If you could go into sort of where you grew up, the development of some of these early interests in biology, obviously in medicine, but also your interest in service to our country. I know you come from a family of folks that have served. Take us into that background story a bit to sort of lay the groundwork for what we're going to be getting into.
Sure. Well, as you alluded to, I come from three generations of. I'm a third generation of naval service in my family. And so I grew up in and around the Navy. My father was a career naval officer. His father went to the Naval Academy and served in the Navy. So I grew up moving to a lot of different locations. Interestingly, I was born in Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and only lived there for a couple of years. So I don't remember it from that, but I did end up going back there several times for work-related engagements later on in my career, which was interesting. Guantanamo Bay is obviously been in the news for various things over the years, and it's a very interesting place and kind of an interesting footnote to have been born there. But I lived a lot of places around the world. As my dad was in the Navy, we lived in Italy, lived up and down the East Coast, lived in Michigan, ended up going to high school in Michigan. And that's where I started getting more and more interested in potentially a career in service myself. I got more and more interested in the sciences and the physical sciences, and did some work with some friends, some neighbors who were physicians, who got me involved in some volunteer work and some work in some hospitals, and just got more and more interested in medicine, pre-medicine. Ended up being fortunate enough to get accepted to Stanford, went out to California and pursued my pre-med education and training, majored in human biology out there, and had a great time, great school, great experience, and was used that as the stepping stone to get into medical school. I ended up going to getting accepted to Georgetown Medical School, and this was when I thought I could really start my service in medicine, but also the military. So I got a Navy scholarship to medical school, which was a great opportunity for me. And it gave me the freedom and flexibility to take a year off between college and medical school. And I spent the year essentially backpacking around the world, across Europe and across South Pacific, Southeast Asia, and spent much of the year just traveling and sort of identifying and sort of unearthing my interest in engaging with other cultures and seeing the world and being part of sort of the global community. And then I took some of that into medical school with me, and as part of the Navy scholarship, I was able to do some interesting opportunities outside of medical school in the summers and other things. And I also took advantage of some overseas studies opportunities in medical school for some practical experiences in some foreign countries, which kind of furthered my interest in that arena. And then from medical school, I went on into the Navy and started my career as a Navy doctor.
Outstanding. And David, before we get into what you're currently doing now, I found it interesting. As I was researching and reading a lot about you, in the early 2000s, you published quite a bit in the peer-reviewed literature. I noticed you gave several presentations on this theme of civil military medicine, and you were pointing out in some of these papers that we normally think in that particular case of our United States Department of Defense, in fighting conflicts, but you were pointing out whether it was the Asian tsunami in 2004, Hurricane Katrina here, the Pakistan earthquake, that our military, in that particular case, is involved in a lot more in terms of these medical security, medical cooperation activities. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this, because I know that, not just were you involved, but you were involved in thinking about ultimately how we service, recruit, retain professionals for this very challenging set of environments. Can you talk a little bit about that part of your career?
Yes, I kind of stumbled into that almost by accident. My first few years in the military, I was a flight surgeon with the Marine Corps, and then I went back and did some additional residency training in family medicine. I became board certified in family medicine. During that time, I had the opportunity to do some practical experiences way up north in Alaska with the Indian Health Service, up in Nome and north of the Arctic Circle, and then also in Haiti during some of our support operations down in Haiti. And that was kind of my first exposure to this sort of military medicine interface with civil military medicine, medical security cooperation, these sorts of concepts, which at that stage hadn't really been fully fleshed out. The U.S. Military medicine had been used for many years in a number of roles, and but it hadn't really become sort of codified into some of the doctrine and training and some of the advanced practices. But after those initial experiences, I served as a family medicine doctor over in Naples, Italy, and there I had a chance to be on a team that responded to an earthquake in Turkey, which is quite an interesting experience. And then also some medical humanitarian missions down in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. And I learned a lot from those, and also realized that I think there was a lot more to learn. And that led just by happenstance to an assignment at the Pentagon in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where I was working on peacekeeping, humanitarian affairs, and global security cooperation issues, civil military coordination issues. And I was bringing in the medical perspective because more and more we were finding that we were being called to provide more sort of international global medical support in various settings, but also realizing that it was a very valuable tool. It's very much of a kind of a mutual area for cooperation between militaries, but also between the civil military sides of the equation. And this, of course, ended up being around the time of 9/11, and then the aftermath of the US military getting very engaged in Afghanistan, and then not too long after that in Iraq. So I was very involved in the sort of humanitarian planning for Afghanistan, and making sure that while we're winning the military battles, we're also winning the hearts and minds battle, if you will, which involved a lot of medical security cooperation, civil military coordination, and gradually we started to see that medical engagement is really an important consideration during insurgencies and counterinsurgency. And because there's a lot of requirements in counterinsurgency or security cooperation or civil military coordination or cooperation is to address the needs of the population. To address the needs of the host nation military. Host nation military, in order to function, has to have a very functional medical program, has to have a very functional military medical capabilities. Otherwise, they're going to be very unprepared to fight, and their members, their soldiers, sailors, airmen are going to be unprepared and sort of unmotivated to be out in the fight if they don't know that they have medical support. And so building up the military medical capabilities of your partners was really seen with a growing recognition of the importance of that, but also helping to build the health capacities, the health capabilities of the host nation that you're partnering with in order to meet the needs of the populace as a really important element of any campaign. And so I got more and more involved in that, and in Afghanistan, and then really to a significant degree in Iraq as well.
And whether we're in a disaster zone, a battle zone, and then we'll get to the border in a moment. The unifying theme here of so-called austere environments comes into play, and I found this one piece from these are part of the Army definition, but I assume sort of the Navy is quite similar, but it defines an austere medical environment as one that experiences significant environmental hazards that would exacerbate existing medical conditions, 2, limited access to electricity, and 3, where force protection levels mandate that either have body armor on, chemical protection, and so forth. Now, needless to say, I don't get into a lot of this in medical school or traditional medical school courses. Talk a little bit about the principle of austere environments, and a little bit, because it seems like something that you're learning on the job continuously on how to deal with these vagaries of medical practice. But say a few words about how one goes about thinking and planning for such austere environments.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is obviously not something that you would typically learn in a typical, at least United States medical school. I will say that the military medical school at the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda is embracing more of these concepts and training and providing more experience in this area for the military medical personnel who are graduating from there. And I had one of my last assignments was on the faculty there, And we had a Center for Disaster and Humanitarian Assistance Medicine where I worked, and we started developing a lot of curriculum, a lot of training, a lot of education in these areas. As you point out, it's become obviously not necessarily a new reality, but certainly a more ever-present reality of our engagements around the world are not necessarily in a fixed battlefield space with all of the available logistics and such. It's often in a 360-degree battlefield environment, or it's in some very remote developing country. So my training, I had been fortunate to get a lot of tropical medicine training, to have had a lot of operational experience on 6 continents throughout up into the midpoint of my career, where I gained a lot of perspective. I was able to do some additional training like the International Diploma in Humanitarian Assistance. And then of course on the ground, on the job training in responding to disasters around the world, but also Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think you're right that it takes a really different perspective and a mindset. You have to adapt to the conditions as you find them. You can't bring in the mindset or the practices or the conditions as you would like them to be. You have to be extremely flexible. You have to understand the disease patterns, the epidemiology that you're going to face, but also manage expectations in terms of what is possible and what is feasible and what can be done there and what needs to be either deferred or referred. And of course, the key is always partnership building, collaboration, working with the locals, working with local partners, integrating with systems as best as possible. But there's a whole, we could spend a whole entire session and or multiple courses on these topics, and to include the art and science of medical interpretation, of working with medical interpreters, but also the intercultural communication in a lot of settings, managing cultural expectations and managing sort of the cultural intermediation that is required to do a lot of this work. It is very challenging. And the U.S. military has been paying, and especially the military medical community has been paying more attention in these areas in recent years.
Excellent. Okay, so I appreciate you laying all that groundwork, David. And now let's segue over to the Chief Medical Officer office. I introduced CBP at the beginning of the show. Part of Homeland Security. Your office is new in the sense that I believe you're actually the first Chief Medical Officer in the organization. Give us a little history here, because I know this is not something that has not existed for very long. You obviously come with a tremendous amount of experience from these other austere environments. Take us into a little bit of the history, when the organization was set up. I know you have quite a large network now of folks that report to you that are out there in the field across the border, but talk a little about the office in general and sort of the setup of everything.
Sure. Well, I first came to DHS, Department of Homeland Security, about 5 years ago. And when I started, I was technically a senior medical advisor. And it turned out that for much of my early time there, I was really the only medical professional, physician level medical professional at CBP. And I think that was a legacy of sort of the reorganization of DHS, and that we were still getting caught up with some of the medical support requirements for such a large and operational organization as CBP. So I worked with a lot of leadership to do some needs assessments, some capabilities-based assessments, some gap analyses, and the leadership really embraced the need to have a much more robust medical support for personnel, for operations, as well as for persons in custody. And so over several changes in leadership and multiple administrations, there's been a dedication to really ramping up CBP's medical support efforts. And one of the first steps there was establishing the Chief Medical Officer position a couple of years ago. And I was fortunate to step into that role as the first chief medical officer at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, but also the establishment of the office of the chief medical officer. Up to that point, it had been myself and a couple of colleagues who had been assigned to work with me, really starting to pull all this together. But since then, we've grown to a team of over 50 people now, 50 medical professionals of various shapes and sizes, be it medical administration, medical planning, medical operations, occupational medicine, behavioral health officers, medical support specialists, operational medicine physicians, emergency medicine physicians, and myself. And so we've really grown out the office of chief medical officer now to over 50 persons. And within the next year, we're trending towards 70 to really get to a point where we think we have a handle on all the medical support requirements for an organization the size of CBP. CBP, as you mentioned, is the largest federal law enforcement agency. It's extremely operational. We're not really a force in garrison. We're a force in the field that is operational 24/7, 365. We have close to 63,000 personnel. So the medical support requirements, and I've structured my team, my office, our mission is to provide optimal medical support to personnel. Mm-hmm. So CBP personnel, 63,000 persons, very operational, deployed all the time, COVID issues, force protection issues, force health protection issues. So we're really trying to build up our capability to support and focus on that. That's number one. Number two is medical support to operations. As I said, we're operational around the country 24/7, 365. We have a very robust emergency medical services program. We have over 1,900 EMTs. I provide the medical direction, oversight, coordination, help with the training and the equipping for over 1,900 EMTs and paramedics who are out all day, every day, providing medical support, especially on the southwest border, where we're conducting hundreds and hundreds of saves and rescues and medical interventions in the field every year. Not to mention our naloxone programs, which we're having naloxone saves for people with fentanyl overdoses on a regular basis by our agents, officers, and EMTs. Our AED program, tactical medicine program, individual first aid kit programs, aviation medicine, dive medicine. CBP has its own, air and marine units. We have the air and marine operations branch. And so there's dive medicine requirements, marine medicine requirements, flight medicine requirements. So the operational medicine mission is really large and robust, and we're scaling up to provide the support for that. So that was number one and two. And then number three is persons in custody. Obviously, a lot of what we do on the southwest border is apprehending, bringing persons into custody for processing and holding, and then transfer on to the appropriate entities. But last year we had over 2 million encounters brought into our custody. All of them need medical interaction of one sort or another, be it a health interview or medication provision, medical assessments, medical encounters, medical referrals, public health, infectious disease support, medical summaries upon discharge. So we had to build up a very robust medical support system for that. When I first got here a few years ago, we had maybe a dozen contract medical personnel at a couple facilities on the southwest border. We've ramped that up now to over 1,400 medical personnel at 86 medical units along the southwest border, providing 24/7, 365 medical support. That's millions of medical interactions every year. And CBP has really become and should be recognized or has been recognized more as not only a law enforcement organization, but really a humanitarian organization as well, in terms of the support that we provide on the southwest border, in terms of the medical support, but also the saves and the rescues that we're engaged in all day, every day, hundreds every year. No one provides more medical support to persons along the southwest border than CBP. No one's saving more lives out there than CBP. And of course, the medical part of that is a huge piece. And that's what we're aiming to make sure that we're always supporting as best we can.
Yeah, as you lay sort of a picture there. You know, most of us obviously only see the border from, you know, the a couple seconds of stuff that's flashed on the evening news. But as you were just laying out there, you have clearly an austere environment, 100+ degree weather. I assume scorpions and snakes and all sorts of other things like that. As you were mentioning, you're dealing with the, you know, COVID plus other infectious diseases, the opioid crisis on top of that. Just talk a little bit about the triage. Obviously you have, as you mentioned, all the operational and the staff and all those capabilities, but at the same time, migrant health. Talk us just a little bit about sort of triage in that environment. You know, obviously heat stroke probably takes precedence over what, you know, drug mule, or whatever it may be. But, you know, talk a little bit about some of the different scenarios that you might run into that you gotta, you know, this is a tricky triage.
Yeah, as you pointed out, it's a unique situation. It's a unique operating environment. It is austere. There's a lot of challenges, and so the first was really understanding what we're up against and understanding the population that we're trying to help. And these are people who've had long journeys. They may have had underlying medical conditions before they started, and they certainly encounter medical issues and challenges on the way. On any given day, we're seeing unaccompanied children, might be an infant or a toddler, all the way up to elderly people and pregnant women and people who have all sorts of medical conditions, and who are subject to a lot of environmental challenges as they hit and or cross the border. Extreme heat, certainly dehydration, but also we get a number of hypothermia situations as well in some of our settings, because we're in the mountains down on the border, and the winters in some areas can get pretty cold. The summers obviously get very hot. So we've got to really be prepared for all environmental conditions, and really all medical conditions. We're going to see it at some point throughout the year. So we had to build a very flexible, layered system, and it starts with first encounter out in the field, where we train our agents and officers to recognize, respond, refer for medical issues. We also have EMTs and paramedics out in the field that they can turn to and can be first responders out in the field. And of course, we do a lot of training with them, a lot of specific austere tactical training, so they're prepared for the environments that they're working in. We certainly partner with and rely on local health systems for 911 EMS support. But when people get to our facilities, we've sort of designed our medical teams. We've set up our medical units with the right equipment, supplies, medications based on historic trends and patterns that we've seen. And we sort of know what to expect, but we also expect the unexpected. We do initial health interviews as people first arrive to look for public health, infectious disease issues. We don't want those getting into our facilities if we can avoid it. We want to recognize that up front and take the appropriate precautions. That certainly was very manifest during COVID times, but even before that and during and after, we see and or could see other public health infectious diseases on any given day. So we're vigilant. We have systems in place for that. We have the ability to provide on-site medical care for persons who have acute conditions or manageable conditions. If they're very complex or emergent, we will transport to the local health system, the local hospitals, and coordinate with them. But having these 86 locations, 1,400 medical personnel in our facilities, which is that's new for us over the last couple of years, has proven to be really invaluable. It provides on-site care. We're able to address and identify issues up front, and we're also able to avoid a lot of referrals to the hospital that would have happened otherwise.
Yep.
That's very that slows down our processes. That takes agents off of the line to transport and do hospital watch if we weren't able to do this in our facilities. So providing this basic frontline care in our facilities has been very beneficial medically, but also operationally. And that's one of the important things, is that our medical support is really embedded. It's really a component of our operational mission. And we make it seamless and make sure that it integrates and synergizes with our operational mission. And so that's been a lot of the sort of the development of this process is to recognize the requirements, recognize the required capabilities, and then make it very layered, make it very flexible, make it very adaptive, and then continue to refine on a regular basis. And that's what we've been doing.
Dave, before we were chatting before the show, one particular case or area that you were quite proud of in terms of the degree of success was when we had the major Haitian migration from several months ago, where I think had close to 1 million people coming through. And I mean, this just really speaks to sort of the degree of not just the scale that you had to deal with, but how successful you were in processing and providing care for this major influx. Talk a little bit about the Haiti story and some of what happened then.
Sure. Well, last year, we had sort of a focused surge of Haitian migrants in the Del Rio area. And that ended up, all told, over a very short period of time, being over 25,000 Haitian migrants coming across at a single crossing. And CBP was sort of on the front line of that, on the tip of the spear, to address and sort of manage what was really potentially a humanitarian, could have become a humanitarian crisis. But CBP was very proactive. I think some of the work we've been doing in the past couple of years helped get us ready to respond to that. My team was down there instantly. I was down there, not instantly, but down there very quickly, early on in this engagement. I was down there myself to plan the medical support, to plan the humanitarian support. So we were able to lean in very quickly. And what was a very remote, austere setting, it was essentially an encampment. The Haitians were just sort of encamping themselves in a area under a bridge for shelter. It was an unprepared site. It wasn't in a fixed facility. And CBP essentially had to bring, in an expeditionary way, the capabilities to process and provide security for those persons, but also ended up having to provide the humanitarian support, which is a very significant challenge in this essentially austere environment. And so my team worked to provide the medical support. We worked with a number of partners, interagency partners, and Health and Human Services, as well as our own organic CBP medical capabilities. And very quickly, we deployed and employed up to 150 medical personnel at our peak there to provide appropriate medical support for the migrants, because again, these migrants had young children, pregnant women, elderly people with various medical issues. And so we were able to provide very robust frontline field-based medical support. If we identified an issue that was an emergency or complex, we would partner with the local health systems to refer. But we also helped lead efforts to identify the other humanitarian requirements: water, sanitation, hygiene, food. And so a lot of innovative partnering and innovative solutions were brought to bear to stand up this really unprecedented level of support for CBP to provide to this very challenging situation. And CBP ended up clearing that over the course of a week to 10 days to 2 weeks, all told. But for that period of time, it was a very complex undertaking. And I think CBP as an organization was and is and should be proud of the response. And in that type of a setting, we saw no deaths, and we saw no patterns or significant examples of adverse outcomes from a public health infectious disease standpoint or other sorts of things that would be expected in a setting like that anywhere else in the world. And so I think that's a testament to the great work that CBP was able to do.
Absolutely. When you hear more stories like that, it's just so impressive, the scale and so the efficiency that you're able to work in these situations. So really, kudos for all of that. Dave, Innovation is a very hot topic for us, and in pertaining to some of these austere environments, we've had some guests on past shows from organizations like DARPA that working on sort of what are the technologies required, whether it's to help during that golden hour in the battlefield, or interesting ways. I point to the case of Dr. Jeff Ling at DARPA that was coming up with ways to sort of zap information to 3D printers to make drugs in the field that you may not be able to keep there because of cold chain issues and so forth. Talk a little bit about innovation. What are some of the things that you'd like to see, whether there's some of these cutting edge technologies, drones? I know we've spoken a little bit offline about importance of the information technology systems when processing all of these people and the data that goes along with it. Take us into the innovation space. What are some of the things that you'd like to see as this role of CMO matures and your organization continues to grow?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something that we try and take some time to think about and sort of pull our heads up out of the day-to-day. We've been in sort of surge operations for a couple of years now, and so sometimes it's hard to step back and really try and think about the bigger picture and sort of future capabilities. But one area that we're very proud of is our Austere paramedic program. CBP has a number of layers of medical capabilities. We have EMTs, but we also have paramedics. We also have special forces units, BORTAC and BORSTAR, Border Patrol, Search, Trauma, and Rescue teams. And we've taken either some of the best of those, and we've established an Austere paramedic program where we do a very advanced training, multi-week training down in San Antonio with a team of expert physicians from around the country. And we really provide this next level training to a cadre of Austere paramedics who are able to function then independently in very remote, very austere settings without immediate sort of on-site or online medical direction. And they can sustain that for prolonged field care. And they have a sort of a higher level of medical capabilities that they can take into these very remote, austere settings. So we've used certainly some cutting edge technology in their training, and these are sort of a cutting edge innovative capability that we've developed. We do want to keep looking at different technology that we can enable these sorts of capabilities. Some of the communications technologies, maybe some of the telemedicine technologies, and some other field-based tools that they can take with them to manage this prolonged field care in very remote and austere settings, things that we want to continue to look at and to build that capability. Another area that we saw as we really started ramping up our medical support for persons in custody, and we went from, a dozen medical personnel at a couple facilities, like I said, exponentially up to 1,400 medical personnel, 86 medical units now. We saw quickly that paper documentation wasn't going to cut it for us. So a couple of years ago, we started working within CBP. My team led the development of an in-house CBP electronic medical record system. It's a custom-built system that we developed with some to build off of some IT systems that we already had in place here at CBP, and we created a operationally tailored electronic medical record system that was designed to interface with our enforcement systems, our enforcement information technology systems, because our medical and enforcement efforts are linked, starting from first encounter, certainly at our facilities, and then for transfer onto other entities. And so we developed a very innovative, custom developed from scratch, really operational electronic medical record system that directly mirrors our processes from the field. We were able to sort of integrate our forms, our paper forms, into electronic tools, allows us to document and follow the migrant throughout the entire medical journey, but also their operational journey of care with us. And that gives us a lot better visibility on what we're seeing. We're able to pull more data. We're able to do tracking and trending. We're able to do medical quality management. It just opens up a whole array of capabilities for us. That program, that EMR program, is fully functional now. We continue to add additional functionality to it as we identify new requirements, but it was developed through a series of rapid sprint cycles, and it's been fully rolled out for over a year now. And we're on pace this year to document over 2 million medical interactions in that EMR. And we also have developed the ability now to transfer that information, medical summary information from our care onto our partners at ICE. If we transfer someone there, or onto HHS, if we transfer someone there, we're working on those capabilities with our partners in order as another sort of innovation step on that. So that electronic medical record has been really something that we're proud of, and that we continue to enhance. We've been able to build in different applications like medication applications, so we can track the medications of persons who come in and require medication. Also, we're able to track enhanced medical monitoring of persons who require that while they're in our custody. And it's a very user-friendly, end-user operational tool that we're very proud of.
And then just sort of the flip side of that, David, the interesting learnings from the field, from the austere environment that, you can impart to, whether it's trauma care or infectious disease care, whatever, that you can impart to your colleagues that are, practicing family medicine in Des Moines, Iowa, or whatever. Any interesting insights along the way that's like, hey, in this really challenging environment, we learn X, Y, and Z, and there's new knowledge that we can now bring back to the rest of the country for better medical care.
Yeah, I think that from our perspective, it's really be prepared for anything. You never know who's going to enter your facility and what medical condition they may have. You have to consider the whole person. You have to consider their history. You have to consider their journey. You have to have that intercultural communication. You have to have the language tools, and you have to have whatever system of care you're developing. It has to be tailored to the population and the operations and the epidemiology of what you're dealing with. Ours is very unique, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it should be replicated as is somewhere else, but for us, where we are and in our operational space, our operational dynamics, it is very tailored to us, and that's taken some doing. I think with our EMR coming into its first, year and a half of full functionality now, we're going to be able to pull some more data and trending analysis out of that, and hopefully we'll be publishing and able to pull more out of that for some lessons learned and best practices. But it's a work in progress, and but it's a great honor for me and my team to be part of the CBP mission, to take care of our workforce, to support our operations, and also take care of the persons that are entrusted in our custody.
Outstanding. Dave, what's coming up for 2023? Any things we should know about in terms of the chief medical officer office role, its expansion? Anything else happening that is public facing that you can tell us about while we have you today?
Well, I think we're going to continue to expand the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, and we're going to continue to expand that level of professional medical direction and oversight of the work that we're doing. And we're also going to continue to expand and adjust and evolve our support efforts and our capabilities to meet the mission as it evolves. It's been very unpredictable over the last couple of years. We expect this year will be unpredictable, and the key is flexibility and adaptability. I think another area that we're proud of, and over the last year we've really been focused on in CBP, is taking a more trauma-informed care approach in terms of our, making sure that our agents and officers have an awareness of sort of the trauma-informed nature of the population we're dealing with, but also making sure we have trauma-informed medical support processes in place, trauma-informed holding processes in place, especially for potentially vulnerable populations such as children. We've really been making a focus on child well-being of persons in our custody. And so I think we'll be continuing to refine and enhance that. We're working with a lot of internal and external stakeholders on that. And that's something that's very important to us. Our agents and officers have always taken pride in making sure that we are taking care of persons in our custody, especially children. But we're making sure now that our agents and officers have the tools so they don't have to necessarily do that personally, that they have other people there to help them, like child caregivers and the medical personnel and other tools to make sure that we're meeting the mission and supporting our agents and officers as they take care of the people in our custody.
Outstanding. Really, really great story. I mean, it's just I think we should hear more about you, David, than, you know, and it's just eye-opening, the sort of, again, the scope of what you're involved in and the scope of your team, and just really, you know, appreciating you, and not just for the medical care, but obviously for the long service to our country, and really wishing you the best with all this as the role and the organization continues to evolve. For everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks, or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. David Tarantino, Chief Medical Officer, United States Customs and Border Protection, part of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. David, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your quite busy schedule to come talk to us for a little while about a lot of these topics we don't normally hear about in the press. Obviously, thank you for what you do. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people out there via what you do. It's an extremely impressive story, and wishing you all the best with it.
My pleasure. Thanks for the outreach, and thanks for engaging with us.
It's great having you.